Brian, Dean Norton, and Lindy Villa, who make all this happen in the best possible way. This last week, considering the title of tonight's talk and in various interactions, I couldn't help recollecting my own introduction to the field of art history, which took place in the early 1980s in a lecture hall about 3 times the size of this one, where I was held spellbound 3 times a week by a scholar who, though I could have hardly known it at the time, was widely considered the world's most innovative thinker about 17th century Dutch painting. In retrospect, I realized how lucky I was that she acquiesced to her taking her turn in the UC Berkeley Art History Department's cycle of teaching undergraduate intro courses. That course, a more or less traditional survey of canonical Western art from the Renaissance until the mid-20th century, from Giotto to Jasper Johns, mostly involved the professor addressing her observations toward the projection of 35 millimeter slides on a screen that loomed behind her on an elevated stage like this one. She paused only to berate the projectionist, a student worker who I think had the name Angelica, who we never glimpsed, but instinctively felt deep sympathy for. Whenever an image went out of focus, that's when she would say, Angelica. Still more occasionally, she would stop to assess the 400 plus scribbling undergraduates who, like me, nodded obediently, affirming we had indeed understood it all, or at the very best, or at the very least, were still present, hanging on her every word. Sometimes when teaching my own introduction to art history courses here at USD, as I did this afternoon, I think about that situation in Wheeler Auditorium where deep knowledge and practical inexperience collide. How best to do the job of facilitating students' entry to the arts' meaningful interpretation is worth considering, after all. We live in a world of wildly varying, though undifferentiated for us, visual outputs. Our speaker tonight has made a habit of considering these conditions as deliberately and as imaginatively as anyone I know. Those of you who were lucky enough to hear the current Knapp chair read from his latest book in the Humanities Center last week, or who had him as a guest lecturer in one of 7 classes that he led at USD over the past 8 days, know already what I mean. Few scholars offer so captivating a demonstration of unhurried, careful commitment to unpacking knowledge, paying attention to the subtle qualities of a given representation, to the tensions and potential for reciprocity that exist between disparate ideas, to the possibility of spontaneous observation and insight, to the changing timbre in an undergraduate's response to a question. Paying close attention is something more than just a performance embodied by a professor standing before desks filled with students. Paying attention models an act of devotion, a means of testing and acquiring knowledge, a gift obtained with the goal of sharing it back as broadly as possible. Art history is finding the right words. That's something you said earlier today. In a real way, this is what disciplines like art history offer the humanities, but especially so when practiced by Alex Nemerov. Alex grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. His father, Howard Nemerov, who taught English at Bennington College and later at Washington University in St. Louis, was a renowned poet who, among numerous other distinctions, served as Poet Laureate of the United States from 1988 to 1990. Alex studied English at the University of Vermont before receiving his PhD in American art history from Yale University. He began his teaching career at Stanford, interrupted only by an extended return to Yale, where he cemented his reputation as one of the most original, polyvalent thinkers working in the field, before he returned to Stanford, where he teaches still. Alex is the Carl and Marilyn Thoma Provostial Professor in the Humanities and has served as chair of Stanford's art department from 2016 to 2021. The Stanford Daily calls him one of the university's top 10 professors, which is no small praise. A prolific writer, Alex is the author of more than a dozen books on American culture, ranging broadly from topics from early 19th century still life painting, the body of Raphael Peale, to the turn of century photographer Louis Hine, to abstract expressionism in a book on Helen Frankenthaler. He's penned a book-length study about a single evening's performance of Shakespeare, Acting in the Night, Macbeth, and the Civil War, an analysis of classic American horror films, Icons of Grief, Val Lewton, and 1940s America, and a remarkable memoir, Silent Dialogues, Dion Arbus and Howard Nemerov. Arbus, the great photographer, was Alex's aunt. Alex is the editor of a volume in the Terra Foundation for American Art's impressive series entitled Experience, as well as countless museum and gallery publications. His curatorial projects include contributions to the legendary exhibition West is America, which took place at the Smithsonian Institution in 1991, a monographic study of the precisionist painter George Alt, as a co-author of a book about the contemporary feminist sculptor Patricia Cronin, and a monograph on Gregory Crewdson's epic series of photographs, Cathedral of the Pines, which was mounted at Gagosian Gallery in New York City in 2016. And for all of you who might be interested, we have a small version of Crewdson's project in the Humanities Center Gallery this term, to which Alex generously contributed a new piece of scholarship. In 2017, Alex was invited to deliver the 66th annual Andrew Mellon Lectures at the National Gallery of Art, an honor reserved for the leading minds in the field of art history. At that time, he was the first American art historian ever to receive that invitation. The series of talks that he gave in Washington, D.C. formed the basis for his most recent book, The Forest, A Fable of America in the 1830s, published by Princeton University Press this year, copies of which are available for purchase after the lecture. The Forest is not your typical art history book, a fact that has scarcely gone unnoticed. Annie Proulx, the American novelist, has called The Forest, quote, one of the richest books ever to come my way, end quote. And no less exuberantly, Edmund Duval has described it as an extraordinary achievement, and it is that. The Forest stands as an example of what a uniquely equipped and generous mind can do to invigorate material that is at once familiar and strange. Tonight, Nemerov is speaking about his forthcoming book project, which has as its target, among other things, the perhaps inexhaustible interest of Diego Velázquez. His Knapp lecture is entitled The Dangers of Knowledge and Art Historical Education. Please join me in welcoming Alexander Nemerov.
Thank you, Derek, so much. Thank you, Joseph. Thank you all for coming. The title here, I think, reflects my choice to not be an expert and not to present, I don't know, my findings or my arguments, but to really be autobiographical, to be personal tonight about something that's kind of hidden in plain view at a university, this university, any university, which is basically, how does one get to be someone who stands up here and then speaks all this? Like, who even is your professor? I'm saying this to the undergraduates, but who, to my colleagues, like, who are we as professors? How did we get here? What's involved? What are the stakes? And, you know, more than that, you know, what are the challenges, just to put it bluntly? And, you know, I've had such a great time here, met so many people, just really enjoyed the students' perceptive remarks about all kinds of things in classrooms, and had a great time in San Diego. But yes, I want to come back to this, which I'm going to propose, though this is very autobiographical, that it's really potentially relevant to all of us. Basically, to say it one other way, like, what am I doing here? What is the point of this? And there's not an easy answer. So as an evidence of how it's not an easy answer, I mean, Derek told me, and it was good, that, you know, you have to have a title on May 1st. So, okay, I like to meet deadlines. So, and this is the title. I'm like, okay, what was I going to call this? Oh yeah, okay. I'm still going to call it that, and it's still about this. It's not a bait and switch, but I was thinking, like, I have some other sort of analogous titles here. Times I have been terrified. That's something I could have called this lecture. And keep in mind, as a teacher, as a student, right now, in a way. And then I thought, well, I could be a little more specific. Times I have been terrified at the threshold of knowledge. So there's something about even learning something, kind of the forbidden fruit idea, basically, where it's a little scary, it's a little illicit just to learn something. And I don't know about you, maybe you all feel quite open to learning things. I think there have been moments that I want to talk about tonight where I'm kind of phobic about universities and learning, and that's been part of my art historical education. And I thought I could just define this just a little bit more, actually. Times I have been terrified at the threshold of knowledge when learning something seemed like a distinctly bad idea. That's my title. Is it surprising that, like, there isn't an overflow crowd at this point? Like, this is the topic? I mean, okay. Then I thought it should really be called Times I Have Been Terrified at the Threshold of Knowledge when learning something seemed like a distinctly bad idea, to be approached with extreme caution or to be altogether avoided with who knows what cost or gain, short or long term, like my definition of education. It probably says something like that in the USD manual, like on the website, right? Yeah. Oh, I want to go to college for sure. That guy, he's putting his finger on it. I'm just trying to say how it has been for me when I was the undergraduate age, and also, like, I don't know, tonight. Like, it doesn't really change. So then I thought, is that a good title? Am I really giving my audience a fair, description of what I want to talk about? Well, times I have been terrified at the threshold of knowledge when learning something seemed like a distinctly bad idea, to be approached with extreme caution or to be altogether avoided with who knows what cost or gain, short or long term, because the people in control of the knowledge, the ones who knew more than me, seemed somehow dangerous. So that's that word from the title. Or if not dangerous, then ones who by their own bravery had some contagious contact with danger. You could translate that as your professor is scary. Like, professors are scary in a way, like, what, they know all this stuff, and it's, how do they know it? Why do they know it? And is there a kind of contagion in the classroom even? I'm not saying you all think like this, but I thought like this. So I'm going to go back to the 1980s now, to when I was, I graduated college in 1985 and University of Vermont. And then that fall I went to Europe and saw the paintings I'd studied in art history classrooms for the first time. And I went to London, and one of the paintings at the National Gallery I made a beeline for is this one, Caravaggio's Supper at Emmaus. I don't know how many of you can relate to this, but I didn't really know what to say. Like, I was seeing the original painting, but no one had particularly taught me how to look at paintings. They told me who painted them and things like that. And I love my teachers, so I'm not criticizing them. But there I was, drawn to this, but not really knowing why. And, now I feel, looking at it, I kind of get the sense. I know why. Like, this is the resurrected Christ, still kind of bloated and swollen from 3 days in the tomb, and he's appeared to two apostles. He's appeared in the guise of just a stranger following them on the road or with them on the road. And then suddenly at the inn at Emmaus, as Luke, the gospel writer, tells it, he suddenly reveals that he is the risen Christ. And that's why this guy's scooching back his chair, and this guy with a kind of Christian exclamation of surprise is doing what he's doing. The innkeeper, doesn't see it though, which is interesting. So now I see and this relates to dangers of knowledge. Wow, my unknowing, unformed 21-year-old self was saying, I'm drawn to a picture that's about belief and about some kind of belief and faith and some kind of crazy, miraculous thing that's happening. But I didn't know about that, and I was just thinking to myself, oh, I remember my teacher talked about the bowl of fruit, and that it's illusionistically painted. It's about to tip off the edge, like right into our lap, and Caravaggio has to do with breaking the picture plane and so on, and that's cool. So I was thinking that, then pretty soon I was saying that because a man was standing next to me, and here's like the dangers of knowledge. I didn't know this man who's a stranger, just a little older than me, in his later 20s, I would say. I was 22. And he was an Englishman and very proper, but in a kind of artsy way, like all black, beard maybe. I don't know, I'm making that up. I don't know if he had a beard. Strike that from the record, right? Yeah. So we were talking, and I was giving my art history major kind of, well, see how the bowl of fruit, like whatever, the basket of fruit, like fascinating stuff. I was just wasn't even looking. And then, as we did this, a young man came up to the man who was next to me. And this young man was more like my age. And he was holding a drawing, a sketch pad. And I realized then, oh, the guy who's talking with me, the 27-year-old, is an art teacher. And there's the man my age, the young man my age, is one of his students. And the student comes up, and he kind of breathlessly shows his teacher this drawing of another painting in the same gallery by Velázquez. Derek mentioned Christ. So Christ has been scourged and whipped prior to, subject to so many different humiliations prior to carrying his own cross to Golgotha. Christ contemplated by the Christian soul, this personification of the soul, guardian angel here. So the young man comes up breathlessly, and he's got this drawing on his sketchbook of just this figure. And he's showing it to the guy. So it's the three of us in front of Caravaggio's painting, but somehow this one is in play. And to me, I thought, wow, that's really good, wow. And the 27-year-old teacher is like, he just kind of quickly pointed out a few errors. And the student was like, oh, thank you so much. And I think it began to dawn on me, there's a whole other world beyond the University of Vermont Art History Department here, and this is feeling a little bit destabilizing to me. And I think something of that had to do with this painting, which I probably glanced in my peripheral vision when I was walking through the gallery, but I definitely wanted to stay away from it. It was weird to me. I didn't like this painting. I didn't go look at it. And just this summer, actually, I was starting to think, why did the whole incident popped up into my mind after 15, 30, 38 years, and why? What was that about? And I'll tell you this, that when I started to think about it again for the first time in almost 4 decades, I was shocked that these two figures were in it. I had no memory of that. To me, it was just the figure of Jesus. It was just this. And then I remembered the particular word I used when I was admiring silently the drawing that this breathless young man had made of this one figure, because he didn't draw the Christian soul and the angel, it was just this figure. The word that went instinctively through my mind was weight, the weight of the figure. And you can kind of see, like, that's unbelievably powerful drawing just to get the weight of the body, right, like that. But I understood that in my forming 22-year-old mind, I was thinking that, like, this is a weighty thing, the whole thing. Jesus, the drawing, the absolute commitment, this, supreme commitment of the artist, student, and the teacher, and the painting, for that matter. And this is to do with the weight of human cruelty, the weight of human suffering, the weight of sacrifice. And I wasn't ready for it. I didn't want to look at it, but it kind of stayed in my mind somehow. And I think the way I would gloss it is that I was having an encounter with the weightiness of belief, faith, religiously or not, just something full-on commitment to serious things, and I was not ready for it. So the dangers of knowledge, I didn't want, no thanks. I mean, I register it all, but I was not ready for that. So, okay, so that's December of 1985. I entered graduate school in September of 1986, PhD program at Yale University. And this is, it's now been converted. This is part of the art museum, but back in the day, this is where our classrooms were. And that's the museum there, et cetera. Whatever, it's a big, big deal. 1986, I arrive at Yale, and this is where another kind of danger begins to happen as I'll just say it like my naive undergraduate self, which is just beginning to encounter like the dangers of believing in something, kind of have the opposite danger, another danger, which I would describe, with all due respect to my graduate alma mater, as like the dangers of not believing. You know, remember the talk's called, at least the first slide, An Art Historical Education. Yeah, everything's scary. Believing in something, but also not believing in something. And what do I mean by that as it concerns Yale? Well, you've probably all, even in just ordinary kind of slang, heard the word deconstruction. Like it's kind of made its way into language now as kind of synonymous with critique or something like that. But that's not at all what it actually means. It refers to a very particular kind of, I guess, analytical, critical procedure on texts and finally works of art that has to do with, to put it extremely simply, refusing to be seduced and taken in by the persuasive fiction of a painting or a novel or anything like that. Instead, it's basically an attitude of suspicion that you have to sort of look at. With deconstruction, you kind of have to not only peer under the hood, but like dismantle the engine so the thing can't run the way it wants to. And these two figures who look extremely formidable, even in slides, I feel like I should just go sit in the back row with them glaring at me, but they're kind of the main figures of deconstruction. And at Yale, though I never took a class with them, partly because Paul de Man died in 1983 before I started, and Derrida, who used to visit Yale, was not there when I was there, but their influence hung heavy, and the whole atmosphere of Yale was to do with, the powers and intensity of critique, right? And with de Man in particular, he was more, they're both influential for me, and the odd thing is I kind of got deconstruction very well, even though it scared me a great deal. And de Man was the main figure for me, though, like I said, I never met him. But so here's my copy of Allegories of Reading, one of his very dense texts. And my purpose tonight is not to kind of go through all of, like what is deconstruction, but I will give you one example just to exemplify what I mean by, this procedure of suspicion. So in Allegories of Reading, and this is a page from my own book, and it has my own marginalia. In this middle, you see the quotation. That's key. That's almost like an epicenter of deconstruction. It's from a poem by W.B. Yeats called Among School Children, okay? And it's hopefully we can talk about it afterwards. Like, I didn't get that part, but hopefully I can take you through this quickly. So when Yeats is saying, you know, "O chestnut tree, great rooted blossomer, are you the leaf, the blossom, or the bowl, like the trunk?" Basically saying, like, when you read a novel or you look at a painting, it's like looking at a tree. Like, what part is not the tree? The leaf is the tree. The bark is the tree. You know, it's all one thing. You know, there's a unity, and you revere that and you accept that. And Yeats continues, "O body swayed to music, O brightening glance." And then this is the key line: "How can we know the dancer from the dance?" It's like, it's about the sort of perfect, coherent unity of the aesthetic act as the highest thing for William Butler Yeats and for a lot of people, right? That's the thing that deconstruction wants to stab in the heart, punch in the face. Why? Because, in short, and this is what I was learning at Yale, like, artistic faith of that kind is false consciousness. You're being seduced and tricked into some kind of fantasy world. And if you really want to be a rock-solid citizen and to really be a sharp person, you have to be like, how is this, how can I disagree? And, you know, how can I show this to be not so unified? How can I find the cracks in the system? So, you know, this is the whole Yeats stanza: "Labor is blossoming or dancing where the body is not bruised to pleasure soul." Like, this is words of wisdom. Like, those top two lines are just about how effortless making a work of art ideally can be. Like, you don't have to bruise your body to pleasure the soul, you know. Nor beauty born out of its own despair. You don't have to be like a depressive, traumatized person in order to finally see the beauty of the clouds and the hummingbirds and the leaves on the tree. Nor blear-eyed wisdom out of midnight oil. You don't have to pull all-nighters to actually become like a person who perceives the gorgeous unity of the world. And so then he closes with the lines I've already quoted. Now, in my one example of deconstruction, this is where Demon, I'm coming back to this same line. I just want you to focus on the last line of the four. Okay. How can we know the dancer from the dance? And you can see I've even marked that. What do I say? I need to know. It's confusing that they're brought together. Please tell me the difference. That's me paraphrasing Demon, because this is the way he would read that. He would say, how can we know the dancer from the dance? What's to prevent us from reading that, saying, sort of changing the intonation of that question and saying, please, you have to tell me. It's a matter of incredible importance. How can we know the dancer from the dance? Like, I need to know how to tell the dancer from the dance. I need to break apart this representation, and you know. So in short, it's a way of like being not conned, you know. So it's a certain attitude about art, and man, every grad student certainly was speaking this way, and you were considered a total loser if you were not on board with this kind of thing. Okay, people are like, well, he must be exaggerating a little. No, no, I'm not. And okay, so it was a volatile time, made all the more volatile, and I'll say dangerous by, I guess you could say what happened to Demon, but I would say more like what was discovered about Demon, which is way back when he was in his 20s, he had written some pro-Nazi journalism at the start of World War II. And that threw into kind of chaos all of his prestige. He was dead, but people had a lot of feelings about this, and, you know, this kind of criticism becomes then something that sticks to deconstruction. And I would actually use, in what I'm about to say about deconstruction and the feeling it had for me and why it was terrifying to me, even though I did it, was good at it, and still am good at it, I guess. The word I probably would use is it was toxic. And you might say, like, toxic as a metaphor. No, in my mind, when I was in my 20s, it was like poison. It had a kind of poison or contagious kind of connection to illness, I guess, is what I would say. And this slide kind of gets into that, and here's another way that it does, which is, this is a detail from a painting from 1986, so my first year of grad school. And this painting that this is a detail from is called Footmen, and it's by one of the hot artists of the New York art world in the 1980s. Many of you have heard of Jean-Michel Basquiat, who's probably then and in posterity like the most significant of these artists, but David Salle was another one of these young Turk artists. And you might say, well, how is this going to relate to the toxicity and deconstruction? I can tell you pretty concisely. Salle appropriated different images and then, like maybe a film still of like an escaped convict here, and then these are kind of silkscreen prints of, I believe, his wife in a state of undress. There's an actual physical object, like a bowl painted like a target that's kind of protruding out. There's the figure with the lipstick that I've mentioned or shown in the detail. And there's the mud flap girl that you see on the mud flaps of an 18-wheeler up kind of looking in the same direction as the escaped convict. It's all kind of a pastiche of images, like we might say now like a Pinterest or something like that, but presented as a big painting. And in a way that had nothing to do with David Salle's intentions, I really saw this picture in terms of the toxicity of the 1980s that I was living through. So starting with the figure here, this figure comes from Diego Velázquez's painting, The Drinkers, and it is the uncannily, illusionistically persuasive figure, like of the main drinker who's got the bowl of red wine before him. This is the god Bacchus, the god of wine. Not only is Salle deconstructing, I would say, this. You see, this is like, this is what those art students in London were basically trying to do, like the weight, the substance, the presence of a figure. Sure, it's a painting, but you believe, and you are glad you believe. It's not false consciousness. You don't want to peer behind the curtain and see how the fiction was made. You're just blown away by the fact that the guy created the illusion of life like that. That's on the one side. Like the dangers, the freakiness of belief. Paintings as kind of freaky, magical things that kind of suck you in like that. This is kind of the dangers of another thing where it's, it's deliberately kind of ham-handed and, punctures the illusion altogether. And I'm looking at that, and in terms of the toxicity of the 80s, I just saw it very simply. I'm sure wrongly, but simply as this is alcoholism, this is being wasted. That's one side, and this is like this. This is being, wired on cocaine, which in 1986 is, ubiquitous. Only just removed from like open cocaine use in part like undergrad parties and so on. Like that's more like 84, 85, I would say. 86, maybe you would at least have the decency to do your lines in your apartment or whatever, but it's a ubiquitous thing. It's just that was the drug. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking the whole deconstructive scheme here, and the way it's painted, but also the subject matter is just disturbing to me. It's like this whole world of disbelief, unbelief that's, for me, connected to different toxicities, demands, past, but then also substance abuse, and no faith in language, no faith in paintings. I was on board with all of that except the drug and alcohol part, but it was disturbing. It was a disturbing decade, I would say. And there was one other way it was disturbing. Sally's painting comes out of basically one of the kind of grandfathers or godfathers of Sally's kind of art is Andy Warhol. Everyone's heard of him. Andy Warhol got his start as a fine artist in the year 1960 with these. This is like taking a newspaper ad and kind of projecting it with a projection screen onto your canvas and then kind of painting it in a way that queers it. So a bodybuilding ad becomes, he doesn't paint all the words like strong arms and broad shoulders. Broad shoulders become broads and so on and so on. And here's my way of just mentioning what the toxicity of this for me is. Well, Warhol died suddenly in 1987, so completely in this world I'm talking about. And I associate Warhol a lot with one of my other professors, this youngish man who taught at Yale for one semester in 1988, and whose class I took, named Craig Owens, a brilliant, formidable, and perhaps you've heard the term postmodernist critic at that time, who was dying of AIDS. And if I had to say, what was the single most dangerous, scary, toxic thing that I experienced in grad school, that really kind of threw me for a loop, actually. I would say it was taking his class this is not something I'm proud of. I'm just saying, that's how I registered it. It was with all these brilliant people. I kept my mouth absolutely shut. I was way out of my league. He's 6'7", really big, commanding guy, charming, but not tolerating fools at all. And his seminars would go on for hours. And it was an epicenter of deconstruction, and whether one wanted it to be or not, it was an epicenter of AIDS. And I remember March 17th, 1989, I was coming from New Haven to New York, was going to see my girlfriend who was living in New York, and it was the St. Patrick's Day parade. I kind of come out of the subway at Midtown, and very strikingly, in a kind of beautiful way, the Middlebury Union High School band is marching right past me on Fifth Avenue. Striking for me because my first love was in Middlebury, and I was born in Vermont. It just felt really beautiful. Within a moment, Craig Owens and another guy walked past me. He was wearing a big black coat. This is March 17th, 1989. He died in July of 1990. They were having this animated discussion, and they were obviously coming from the Warhol retrospective down the street at the Museum of Modern Art. That was the last time I ever saw Craig Owens. I remember later that day, I kind of passed out on the streets of Manhattan, on the sidewalk, and my girlfriend was, basically said, you have to go home, or we have to take care of you. I think she was kind of not pleased, actually, that I passed out, but I did. And I think it was just, we talk about an education, and let's gain some knowledge. Well, it is a little bit like taking the fruit from the tree. What's going to happen if I do that? I'm not going to take the fruit. And you can see in a very distinctive 1980s style, it's all bound up with the personal, with very deeply personal things. And this is my kind of descent into unbelief, I guess I would describe it as. There were, moments certainly of my prior self, my undergraduate self was still with me. I don't want to say I was struggling to get out, but it was still with me, and I was just thinking, wow, before I went to Yale, just like in 1985, summer of 85, so before I went to Europe, I was driving from Vermont to St. Louis with my undergraduate girlfriend, and this will show what a romantic I am. I said, well, let's stop at the Art Institute of Chicago, because I have this favorite painting there, and I really want to show you, like this painting, okay? And I get there, and of course, in classic fashion, it's like, oh, I'm so sorry, that's not up right now, so that's not good. So it seems hard to believe, but as a callow young student, I just said to someone in particular, I don't know, the information desk, do you think we could just go back to the storage and see it? It's absurd, right? And they go, yeah, I guess you can. So they took us back into the storage, and there was this big, heavy, this is a 9-foot tall painting, life-size figure of Jesus against that black background. They took, it was sheathed in heavy plastic, and they peeled back the sheath, I remember. But then it was just like in London for me 6 months later. I don't know what to say. I mean, we got this chance to see it. I don't know what I will say about it. We just kind of saw it, said thank you. I realize now, notice that phrase recurs a lot. I realize now I was just captivated, as I still am, by the idea that a painting is a vision. It's just like a visionary thing. It's like a three-dimensional figure. It's that absolute belief, all the opposite of what I was going to be taught at Yale. And then that's equally scary, right? Imagine if I, in the galleries there in Chicago, like dropped to my knees in front of it, like the guards would come, right? That's not appropriate. But whether one is religious or not, I guess what I'm trying to demonstrate is that some kind of belief in something is super scary too. And I'm just trying to portray my world then and to some extent now in order for us all to reflect on this kind of thing. Zurbarán was always a favorite painter of mine, and this painting, I also had this flash on this painting, another painting of Jesus. And you know why I flashed on it is because I remembered, fall semester of senior year, I wrote a paper on this painting. It was in a class, I could have picked anything. I picked that one. I got an A, whatever, it was just like art history stuff. I didn't have a clue why I was really writing about it. I look at this painting this summer, I think, I know why I wrote about that. It's so obvious to me, not to anyone else, but it's completely obvious why I picked that painting. And the answer is, and this again has to do with belief and faith, but now in a way that's scary, sure, but also gentle. My mother and I, when I was a young kid, and this is Jesus as an adolescent, a very unusual painting. Jesus is either a tiny baby or he's on the cross, This is unusual. He's a teenager. And here's his mother, the Virgin Mary. He has, in this sort of symbolic way, pricked his finger and is looking at the blood on his finger because he has this crown of thorns on his lap. And then Mary, who's been sewing and has the thimble on her finger, is looking, and there's a tear coming down from her eye at what her son is predicting with this minor accident in the home. Notice the house of Nazareth. When I looked at this again, I said, some of the best times for me were when I was young and my mother and I would watch old movies in a kind of twilight room like this. And it was stable, it was calm somehow. And in that world, we were together, but she was allowing me to have my independence. And it's where I learned to do a little bit what I'm doing right now, which is to be alone. And I suddenly saw it that way, but I also saw that there's a kind of toxicity in this one that's kind of percolating too, which is, you know, it's a little bit dysfunctional, like she's like looking on from her own tragic perspective and projecting that on her son. It's also like the light sources, this window up here with these clouds, it's a little bit like a slightly up in the air sense. And then also the skewed perspective of this. Ever so slightly, this room is out of whack. It's spinning a little bit. And, you know, the paintings we write about, I think, are very personal, whether we avow that or not. But that was my undergraduate days, and I want to now just remark on bringing these things together and kind of try to portray for you why and how I'm standing here. Like, how does one become a professor? What is that all about? What does that look like? And where does such a person even come from? And I can do that by just looking at this Velázquez painting, his most famous, Las Meninas, with the life-size figures at the Prado in Madrid, 10 feet tall. People have written whole books about this. I wouldn't even try to go there. Just say this, and this again has so much to do with the very personal way we respond to art. I have begun to see, like, I was always fascinated by one figure, and it's the man in the doorway, who's basically like a Chamberlain, almost like a Secret Service agent or something like that. The king and queen are appearing in our space. We don't see them, but they're reflected in the mirror. Everyone here is reacting. The painter, Velázquez, the princess here, her two maids after whom the painting is named, the little boy kicking the dog, the dwarf here, these two figures, everyone is in some state of awareness here. But it's the guy in the back that really drew me. And I didn't even know that until just the last year when I went to a theatrical performance by this guy, directed by this man, Dimitris Papianou. And the thing opens with this door in the back, and these two figures wearing kind of prosthetic outfits, but shown in silhouette, so you can't really, they look, the head is persuasive as a kind of bowling ball head. Came out, and I suddenly saw it like, oh, I feel very close. I feel very drawn to that man in the doorway in Las Meninas. The paintings you write about, again, they're not only, quote unquote, telling you something about yourself, they're also really actively, philosophically shaping who you are. And I realized this man was really important for me. And I would say in the terms of our discussion, like he was going to, how should I say it, make it safe to be in the space of belief and not belief. Like, I don't know, like right here. How would that work? The more I thought about it, like my undergrad textbook, wow, he was on the cover. I didn't notice that or care about that until recently, but it's like he's waiting for me in a way. And if so, like, what's he about? What is he trying to communicate to me about what I do, about why I would even stand here? And I realized, like, he's kind of a riff on what I would call a didactic figure that you see a lot in paintings like this one by Zurbaran. A didactic figure, like a professor who stands here and he's like, this is what you need to know. Like, this man is gesturing to the battle between the Christians and the Muslims that was, magically illuminated by the appearance of the Virgin in the sky, etc. But it's a didactic, polemical, ideological fixity, like demanding, like, here's what you need to know. This is the fact, okay? It's a matter of dogma, belief, And what I saw was, this is that same kind of figure, except gently removed to the background. So I was thinking, wow, like, ideally, I've been this guy too many times, but ideally I would be someone I'm up here, just like him, but I'm somehow back. I must appear to you all right now much as he does in the painting relative to the figures in the foreground. I saw, too, that this figure is very concerned with art and with pictures generally. He's up on these steps, and he's kind of halfway into another room. He's on a verge. He's on a threshold, but he's, at this wall with all these darkened paintings and then with the mirror image of the king and queen, like he's associated with images. That made sense. And in that sense, he's like more explicit figures like these in a contemporary painting, that makes it more like a big, car, like a Cadillac dealership of paintings, and whereas Velázquez's painting is very much more muted, but still. And I saw something else, very much in terms of what I'm saying here, is that this guy who's standing there, notice the kind of doubling and tripling that's going on here. This guy who's standing here and pointing to the pictures or in dialogue with the pictures, he's kind of me. He's kind of what I'm doing. One of the professors I taught under at Yale, Vincent Scully, who was very famous, like, I'm just using this as an example of, like, the professor, the one who talks about art, is the man at the threshold, or the person, I'll say, at the threshold. And so this is my version of that. Basically, me in dialogue with this painting is, I'm not saying obviously any of this is right. Who cares about right? I'm saying in my world, we all make up the definition, the philosophy of what we do. I'm just telling you how I've come to it. And the man at the threshold becomes then a figure for me. And it's probably not a coincidence that he is at the vanishing point of the painting. And, so the diagram on the right shows that. And to be the vanishing point, what does that mean? Any professor in this room, are you the vanishing point of your classroom? If so, what does that mean? It maybe means like all all roads converge on you, which is fair enough. Like, when's the exam going to be? Is this on the syllabus? And on up to much more metaphysical questions. Yeah, I get it. But vanishing point is a kind of beautiful thing, somewhat correspondent with that most mystical of all professorial sayings when it is uttered by the professor in a classroom, which is, I don't know. The reason why you're studying the work is because the work takes you to a place that you can't name or know. And you might say, thank you very much. It's not why my parents or I myself am paying tuition. It's not what I signed up for. I mean, with respect, I would disagree. That anything you're moved by a song, a painting, it's taking you to a place that you can't describe. Or it's nothing. It's just some stuff you know. It's, with all due praise to Wikipedia, that's what it is. Only the songs you like, and finally the paintings you like, are the ones that take you out into a space you can't describe. So I'm thinking, wow, the professor or the teacher has something to do with that. Wow, I like that. And I wanted to just pursue this by coming back to University of Vermont, where I was an undergraduate. Williams Hall, this is where I wrote a lot of papers and took a lot of classes right up here. You can see out to Lake Champlain and the Adirondacks. It's totally beautiful. I'm so glad one of my daughters goes there. I get to visit. But my senior thesis, written, turned in at that very building, was finally about an artist who so much relates, I now see, to everything I'm talking about tonight. Thomas Eakins, American artist, whose most famous painting is this really graphic and grotesque picture, shocking in its day and still now, of a medical operation where Samuel Gross, the physician, has a bloody scalpel in his hand. He's doing a teaching demonstration, so he's a teacher. As the patient's mother cringes, and as the assistants pull back the skin from the incision, which is ultimately made to remove a piece of dead bone, osteomyelitis, as the figure socks, hamstring, but disappears here under this chloroform-soaked gauze, like it's a violent painting. All these students up here. This is the artist I was writing about. I didn't write about this painting, but thinking about it for tonight and thinking about all these issues kind of lurking for me, I thought of how people have pointed out that there's a lot of Las Meninas in the Gross Clinic. And you might say, what? Like, that's totally, I don't get that. But Eakins was in Spain, loved Velázquez, and kind of twisted Velázquez into some specific, something that spoke to Eakins' own time and place in Philadelphia. How so? One very famous thing that art historians point out, you see Gross with his scalpel. You see the painter here. It's basically the same posture. One is a doctor, a surgeon. The other is a painter. But it makes sense. Like when you're an artist, you unconsciously absorb powerful precedents. But I also saw something else. We come back to our figure. Wow, it's so interesting. There's a guy in the kind of runway to the auditorium who is posing like this. Do you see him? He's in that murk. This is not a bad slide. This is an accurate, more or less accurate picture of the tonality of the Gross Clinic. And that just made me think about what then is this figure telling me about what I do? Since he's the cousin or the great-great-great-grandson of the man in the Velázquez painting. He's not really the vanishing point, and also he can't see very much. He's in that tunnel, that runway. I don't know what to make of that, but his point of view is removed. It's obscure. He can't see everything. He doesn't know. But he's also, you know what? He's in the vicinity of the operation, the grand, what would you call this? Like the grand human quest to solve problems, to save lives, that's also quite violent. I think it's called the real world. He's there, but he's removed from it. He's believing and not believing. He's present ambivalently. Look at me. I don't know what the hell am I here for, if not to think a little bit for myself even, as well as for you, about answering that question in real time. I mean, as near as I can guess, it's because I'm scared of blood, let's say. I don't want to, no thanks, I don't want to like smother the person's face in chloroform, even though that's helpful to say the least. I don't want to be this guy. To the, with all due respect to heroic surgeons, and I don't think that's the best definition of me standing here. That's a hard lesson. And I'll just say, in honor of the whole crowd here, that is the age groups that are represented, one way I've come to understand all this, which is both a journey from these very primal scenes of belief and unbelief on up to some kind of resolution that allows me to stand here, is that, well, another way to say it is that I've always been the same person. And this painting, which shows like a card game, is by another great 17th century painter, and it's, what would you say, like somehow the young guy is being duped or cheated by these older guys. Fine, that's maybe the story. When I see this, I say, it's the same person 3 times. And the way I understand it is, they're shocked because imagine if you sat at the same table with a younger or older version of yourself. The mystery of our continuity in time. Sure, our discontinuity, like, oh, I was 18 then, I don't even want to talk about that. But what about our continuity? What about the mysterious fact that the person who's teaching you right now is actually the same person as that scared person in the 1980s? And even for me, it's a startling realization. And just to come back to where we started, the mystical basket of fruit that the young the young Nemerov, lamely fixated on for lack of anything else to say, like, it is finally unbelievable. Thank you. And I know, I think we have till 7:20, so we do, and thank you so much for listening to what I had to say. We do have time for a few questions for a few minutes, and then I'm happy to stay afterwards and answer any questions people may want to ask them. Yes. Yes.
And then you give us a beautiful presentation talking about your faith and how your church is this world of art, the church's museums.
That's good.
And we had this wonderful conversation about how in religious paintings there is this glow. What is that for you?
What is that glow for me?
Yeah.
Didn't we kind of live that in the class? Or do you want me to sort of expand on that? Yeah, I like the question, thank you. I would say I've come to understand that probably the best part of me is the person who has some kind of faith, or belief is the term I use tonight, where I'm willing to actually be naive and accept that the extraordinary illusion of reading a novel by Tolstoy or looking at a painting by Velázquez and kind of being brought into a world, having faith as a reader, as a viewer, and me stopping being a smart person. And, William Kentridge has, the artist, contemporary artist, has this great saying when someone was asking him, why weren't you a philosopher? Why'd you be an artist? And he says, well, what I like about my profession is the necessary stupidity of the artist. And I think that's what I have in mind, that you don't know the answers. People make paintings not because they're trying to write an editorial, or it's like an editorial or make a political stump speech. They don't know. Paintings blindly and lucidly extend out into spaces we can't name or know, but which change our lives. They are unbelievable. The best way to approach them with intelligence and care and grace is to deal in that sort of realm of the not known. I'm very unusual and odd in holding to that now because, you know, I basically conceive the classroom as a kind of religious space, no matter how you define it as religion, but it's not, certainly not like a neoliberal space of information delivery and feel-good thrills. I mean, there's got to be another reason to do this than that, you know. So perhaps like many people, I just feel that, as Emily Dickinson said, without belief, the behavior is small. And I just, once I had kids, I began to sort of shift this way, and I think began to see how many people need for the professor to believe in something. Being smart and critical and distant and hip is basically dime a dozen. And just, you know, the story I always tell is my classroom at Yale, I went from like having 18 students to 400 students. And I think the reason is because what I just said, I think people want for something dynamic and real and uncynical to happen in the classroom. It's very hard, perhaps impossible to do, but it's worth, that should be the goal, and then it should come from a place of grace and humility. So tonight, it's been a chance for me to reflect on, like, well, who is the person who stands there and operates in that way? Hopefully he's not an impresario. Hopefully he's not a heroic surgeon. Instead, he's a little guy at the back/front of the room who's just trying to be the vanishing point, but to see a lot, and also to kind of be in the shadows, too. Yeah, yes, in the back.
Earlier in the presentation, you kind of helped us redefine deconstruction, right? That I believe it was to kind of avoid like the seductive nature of the piece and to kind of look at it from a more objective part of the painting and, oh, sorry, the objective point of view. Would you say that like the way you define deconstruction for us, is that perspective dangerous? Like, is that if you obtain that knowledge from a painting, avoiding the seductive, rhetorical point of view, is that the knowledge you're describing as dangerous, or and if not, like, what is the dangerous?
Yeah, thank you. I think everything's dangerous as far as I'm concerned, except maybe those moments with my mother watching old Hollywood films. Like, we all feel some kind of mystic peace at times, but even that had its scariness. I think I'm saying, kind of rhyming your question with the previous one, that I don't want to deconstruct Caravaggio or Velázquez. I would prefer to speak with art rather than about art. And I'm unusual because many people who do what I do would define their very role in teaching to make sure that the students are not tricked and understand that an illusion is an illusion, and you got to see things, got to know how things work. And I just think that's very limited. It's sort of a utility of a kind. It's fine. Like, you look at an ad on TV, how does that work? Like, how did they persuade me? Fine. But then if you're approaching a Velázquez painting or Eakins painting with the same mindset, I don't know. At least I'm done with that. I don't think I really offered a lot with that, except just being garden variety smart. But I will say about deconstruction that in the ironies of things, in the 80s, Derrida and Demont, it's all about, like, well, That's seemingly the meaning of it, but I'm going to tell you it's not, okay? Very left-wing at that time. You know, deconstruction in art history would be like, I heard a paper once about like surveillance cameras in banks and so on, and then the legal defense is saying basically like, well, how do you know that's me? You know, how do you know that's my client? Like taking it apart, like you can't prove that's the person, et cetera, et cetera. The irony is cut to 2016, alternative facts, and basically Trump is a good deconstruction person. Like you think that's what it is, but it's not that. So in the ironies that universities are the mills, often in a progressive sense for how to jam or block or question, what do we call it now, normative behaviors and assumptions. But, you know, things come around and bite you. So that's another point about deconstruction. Yes. Yeah, okay, here and here. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Daniel, we have time for one more related question.
Okay, perfect.
Mine's, it's really brief, but I'm really curious. This morning, by coincidence, and I must ask this, we were in my class trying to unpack the work of Louis Kahn, and we were watching Scully talking about mysticism.
Yeah.
And I said that there was a space between rationally understanding the work of Louis Kahn and what Scully was talking to us about mysticism.
Yeah.
And that I didn't know the answer, and that we were having a kind of a, let's say, a conversation about building up collective knowledge.
Mm.
It wasn't my role to define Kahn materially or mystically, and that figures like Scully make us think about this space. So I'm really curious. I mean, and this is a very selfish question, but what are the dangers of building collective knowledge through a conversation with your students?
As opposed to a mystical.
Or as opposed to a top-down, you know, the figure of the surgeon,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I think there are no dangers, really. It's a kind of community. If it's the professor who's the vanishing point creates the tone and creates the peace, the weighty peace, the severe grace, in short, the joy of the endeavor and of the very space itself. I know certainly many professors who say to me, they tend to be younger than me, but they'll say something like, well, I'm going to teach to where my students are, and they're in a bad place. Mental health crises, so hard to be young. I'm going to just kind of meet them where they are. So I don't say this to them, but my response is like, well, the teacher makes the mood. And if you're going to teach in a depressive way, well, everyone's going to follow, you know. So you may think you're meeting them where they are, but you're really creating who they are. Imagine that. I mean, it's kind of true about teaching, as it should be. So I would say to learn how to not be surgical required for me to grow up a lot, and then take a step back, to see more by stepping back, but in a way to become in the shadows. And then I think to learn to trust my students more and to really listen to them. And then really find the kind of grace within myself to kind of make the classroom be a space of peace, which doesn't mean simplicity at all. And it doesn't even mean proverbial safe space. It just means it's a mood more than anything, where we feel we're on this, we feel we're in the pursuit and definition of something you could call goodness, which is not moralistic or anything like that. It's just it's a mutual endeavor between students and professor, and that's the magical thing. And it's what I trying to learn how to do, yeah.